It would seem as though.
Wouldn't it?
It would indeed seem as though we are back.
We are back.
And we are much healthier than we were last week.
Yes.
Yes.
For the most part.
Welcome to It Would Seem As Though, the podcast where we talk about anything, everything, and nothing.
And girl, mostly nothing.
I'm Vesta.
I'm Annika.
Last week you were sickica.
Girl, I was so dead. I was so very sick last week.
I know. Well, what's funny is I went back. Well, you know, as you know,
As I
I always listen to the pod after it's all done,
Sure.
published, and whatever. Mm-hmm. Not our best pod. We both sounded like garbage. Well, what's funny is I didn't realize I sounded so congested until I listened to it. I'm like, oh, girl.
Oh, honey.
You sound, like, yeah, bad. Anyway, but
so cute.
If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Glad you're here.
But like, what the
tell
hell
your
took you
friends,
so
tell your
long?
family, tell everybody.
But it took you so long on account of why?
I know. What's happening there?
That's what I need to know.
So then I'm going to tell you, if it is your first time listening, if you haven't heard this before, download a podcasting app so you can listen straight through, or you can pause it and come back to it and not have that irritation of going back to the beginning every time.
Yes.
There's a million podcasts, and we're on podcasting apps, and we're on almost all of them.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I have so many different kind of weird things I wanted to talk about this week. One of the very first thing I wanted to is a story of something traumatic that happened to me yesterday.
Okay.
Well,
Was
it was just
genuinely traumatic?
It didn't actually happen to me. It happened in my world. Does that make more sense? So nothing happened to me.
Okay.
Remember? Yeah, I know you remember. So we were talking about that day that we were going to Costco and you saw the little ducklings in the road and
Oh, my God,
traumatized you. All right. Picture this.
Girl.
I'm on my way to the bank. I'm down here on 112th, which you know is so busy all the time.
All the fucking time.
And a car right in front of me and the car right on the other side coming towards me both stop. And I'm like, what is happening? Because I can't see anything.
Yeah.
All I can see is that both these cars are stopped. And then I see the person in the passenger side waving like this. Mm-hmm. When I finally see what's happening, I just about threw up. It was a very tiny little child by themselves in the road, no parent anywhere to be seen. And when I say tiny, I mean 4, possibly.
Oh my God.
And this child looked, I hate to say, but this is how it appeared to me.
Sure.
This child looked high.
Okay.
Like there was something just not,
Yeah.
whatever. Because the way they were just kind of very lackadaisically walking across the road and looking like, what? Cars are bad?
Weird.
I mean, honestly, it was like this kid had no idea that car could kill you if that car hadn't stopped for you.
Yeah.
And then the kid, he eventually walked up barefoot, by the way, up onto the sidewalk and then very slowly up into his yard, I assume his yard, and onto the front. And thankfully the car in front of me stopped, pulled over, got out of their car, and I would guess we're going to the door with them. But I was like, this is and I thought about it all day long because I thought, if those people hadn't been paying attention, dead baby in the road. And can you imagine?
Nope.
Oh my God! Because if you were the driver of that car, I know that on that same road many, many years ago, T came in contact with a young person, but it was the young person's fault.
Right.
They literally were not looking and ran across the street and ran into the side of his car, and broke their arm. And fell to the ground, laying there screaming, as you probably would.
Sure.
And then the mother immediately came out and was yelling at the kid, like, I've told you 1,000,000 times to look before you cross the street, and now look. But T was traumatized.
Yeah, and in that moment, too, like, maybe do something else than yell at your child who's writhing in pain.
Yeah. Pick up your kid, take him to the hospital, do whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was... But that, to me, that just kind of changed how I felt the rest of the day. Because I thought, where the hell are this baby's parents?
Yeah, it's ugly.
Or their babysitter, or their whoever's supposed to be watching them, but somebody failed.
Yes.
It's like, because for that little baby, and I say baby, but he was probably like 4.
Yeah.
But baby.
Yep. But okay, let me tell you, before we moved here, we lived in Oak Grove, which, if you know anything, is like unincorporated Portland, but it's just like gross and scary and
That's
sketchy.
cracky.
Honestly, it is very sketchy, and like not all the places, but like where we lived with, and like in the specific apartment building I lived in, it was like Sketchica, USA. It was like not a good idea to be there, but there was always fighting, always domestic violence around me. But the people behind us, there was a house. So it was like 3 apartment buildings and then a house behind, and it was all part of the same property management. And the house behind was fine until this one family moved in, and it was like a mom and like 3 teenage daughters and like maybe a teenage son and a little boy, probably 3 or 4. And he would be out by himself all the time. And like we lived near the road. We lived off McLaughlin.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I was outside one time, me and my partner were outside, and this woman is walking down the street with this little child, and like a Tesla is tailing them. And it's because it's that woman's husband in the car, and she's walking with the little boy who lives behind me, and he's only, and when I say only, I mean only wearing a t-shirt. That little boy is only wearing a t-shirt.
Oh, no.
It's the middle of the day, and she's like, "Where do you live?" Like trying to find it, and we're like, "He lives back there. There's a house, whatever." So she goes back there with them, but that house was so volatile and so scary that I was like, maybe just take him. You know what I mean? Like, just run. You know what I mean?
Put him in the Tesla.
Honestly, girl, and get out. And I'm like, how horrifying. And she was like, oh, we caught him down here on, like, whatever street. And it was, like, an intersection, a busy-ass intersection. And I'm like, what? Like, how? And how do people just forget that they have children? Especially young children. I don't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let them wander the streets.
Yeah. Well, and I've known, mostly tangentially, the parents who should never have been parents. I mean, being foster parent for as many years as we were, you hear horror stories of these parents who would get high and forget that their children even existed.
Yeah.
And it's like, because we're too busy getting high, doing whatever. And the children, of course, suffer.
Yeah.
And that's how they come into foster care. Yeah. You know, whatever.
Yeah.
The lucky ones, because then there are the kids who...
Which is sad. The lucky ones. And foster care is trash.
Yes.
It's horrible.
Well, you know, and again, having been a foster parent for so long, I can tell you that foster care mostly is trash.
Yeah.
You get foster care workers who are all burnt out. We get foster parents who become burnt out. And then you get the connection with the foster care, the caseworkers and whatever, who are so burnt out because there's not enough people doing their jobs. They never have been, well before a pandemic.
Yep.
And so they kind of, some of them, the ones who are not as great at their jobs, will do pretty much anything to get you to take a kid, including lying to you. And so we certainly had that where they're like, oh no, this kid is great, they blah, 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 blah. And then when the kid would do something that they weren't supposed to, they'd be like, well, we knew they would do it. Bitch, but you said this kid was great.
Let me tell you.
This kid was not great.
I lived with you for a large portion of you being foster parents, and some of those foster boys were cray. You know what I mean? Like, not to be used that lightly, but they were just like, they were unsupervised for most of their lives. They were let to like do whatever they wanted and act however they wanted. And the best part to me was they all thought they were like gangbangers. Every
little white boy.
Yes, and my favorite ones were the ones who were like from Canby. I'm like, bitch, there are cows outside. Like, what do you mean you're in a gang?
They were throwing it down with
girl,
the cows.
I was like, you dumb as a box of rocks. But there are a lot of great foster boys, but sometimes some of them were inappropriate in many ways. Like, you know, there were a couple times in which I'd been like, this one is a no-go because he just like tried to lock me in the bathroom, you know, or whatever it was. You know?
I think one of the most telling things to me is one day we were going over to visit our friends Kate and Maria, and right across the street from them, a police officer lived. So their police car was parked in their driveway. And as soon as we got there, one of our boys, who of course I won't say any names, he was all flipping out like, oh God, there's a cop car. Be cool. It's like, it's an empty cop car because he lives in this house. Whatever, calm down. And he's like, don't you get freaked out when you see a cop car? I go, no. And he's like, well, I do because, you know, I've been arrested. But I was like, I know, honey. I said, but if you've done nothing today,
and we're
and you're white, you're okay.
You're just
no one's looking at you. You're in a car with a bunch of old white people, and ain't nobody looking at you. And he's like, well, haven't you ever been arrested? And I was like, no.
What?
And then he asked, Mr. T, have you ever? And he's like, the likelihood of him being arrested is even smaller than the likelihood of me being arrested. And he then says to me, every single person in my family has gone to jail.
Crazy.
Mother, father, grandparents. So I was like, what?
And
what? And see, that to me, and that was normal for him, and that to me was something I couldn't even relate to.
Yep.
I was like, how, who, how, what?
I know, right?
And pretty much nobody in my family at that point. I mean, I had one sibling, and this is how country we are. I had one sibling who went to jail for snagging a salmon, because without a certain, I guess you have to fish properly, and there's a way that you can catch them that is not
harmful.
I don't know. It's not fair to the. I don't know.
Okay.
But he went to jail for that, and then another brother who went to jail for street racing.
Oh. My
so, but
yeah, no,
we
like
went to
hard
jail
time.
for 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's the thing too. Is like what I don't. I think of us as privileged in a variety of ways. But when you think of that. I mean, and people in our lives should have been arrested more.
Yes.
When I think of my parents, both of them arrested. Most of our family probably should have been arrested. But the fact that small community, white people,
yes,
when and where and why would they ever get arrested? It would, you know what I mean? It would have to be somewhere out of their community. Like,
well, I mean, drunk driving. There was a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Physical and mental abuse.
I was like child abuse, baby, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
neglect.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There should have been. There
should
have been.
But it's interesting. Just like...
But I think of my childhood, and the things I've learned since being a foster parent, is that children in, like, my generation were property.
Yeah. Gross.
And so if you beat your child, if you sexually molested your child, that's your property. And whatever. Mm-hmm. And it had to be so severe for the authorities to do it. I mean, we had to have broken bones or, whatever. You had to be hospitalized for them to go, okay, this has gone too far.
Child's rights are very new. Like, in the grand scheme of the world,
it actually started in the 70s. Right. It started changing. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's the same thing with reproductive rights, because I've had many people say to me, specifically talking about birth parents of my children, because they're developmentally disabled. Well, can't the courts do something to make them not have... No,
that's
cannot.
Eugenics, bitch. That's called eugenics.
Yeah. What you can do is recommend birth control. You can maybe recommend that they have a guardian who can recommend birth control or whatever. But no, you cannot take away someone's right.
You cannot forcibly take away the right to reproduce.
But you used to be able to. Because there were kids in my town who were developmentally disabled, who their parents had them sterilized.
Gross.
So that they could not reproduce. Now, I understand on one level, but at the same time, it's like, just because they can't do math, or because whatever it is, that doesn't mean they couldn't be a good parent.
Right.
And hopefully, if they weren't a good parent, you would step in and help. But for you to make those choices for them.
Right. Well, listen, the whole eugenics movement, they used that, right? Like, used developmentally delayed or developmentally disabled people as, like, a catalyst, though. But they were sterilizing... There was, like, a huge percentage of Native women that were sterilized. Yes. So if you didn't go missing or murdered because you were a Native woman, you were probably sterilized. You know what I mean? Yes. And so... large populations, black women that were deemed like unfit or didn't want the American gene to be passed down to be mixed blood or something that was like problematic. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, what the fuck is that? Like, I just I do understand because we live in a very white supremacist society and I understand that now, but I don't think most people other than people of color and marginalized people understood that. You live in a world that doesn't benefit you. Your people are being forcibly sterilized. Do you know what I mean? How ugly.
I do. So one of the things that happened, and can't even tell you how many years ago this was, but it hasn't been that long ago. There was a government agency here that was offering the women who, specifically women, it might have been men too. I don't remember that portion of it, so don't come for me if I'm wrong. But I know specifically women who were just depositing children in the foster care system because they were on drugs. Mm-hmm. They were offering them a chunk of money to get sterilized.
Okay, yep.
And I remember a lot of people were up in arms about it. It's like, well, they can't make good decisions. They're a drug addict. Well, then all the more reason.
Yeah.
You know, but no one's forcing them. They're saying, here, I will give you this chunk of money, which you will probably spend on drugs.
Right.
But then you won't be depositing any more children to be traumatized in the system.
And that's the decision they make, though, right? You know what I mean? Like, they get